Okay, Marilyn, did you have any questions for Myra?
Well, yes. I enjoyed the book, first of all.
Thank you.
And there was a lot of research, obviously, that went into it. And I'm wondering how true to the history some of those situations were, and particularly Indianola and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's very true to the history. I used, my major resource was Branson Malt's book, Indianola, Mother of Western Texas. And I followed that as a timeline in order to stay with the actual history that went on there. And so the experiences they had before the Civil War, those programs that I talked about that they attended, all of that is accurate. That's what's happened in Indianola. And the attitude that the Germans had, the concern they had about taking part in the Confederacy was accurate, not just for Indianola, but because of the lectures I've done for several years on German immigration in Texas, it tracked with the attitude of Germans all over Texas. So the history is accurate.
Oh, great.
Do you have any specific thing you want to question there?
And so Indianola really did exist, but doesn't exist anymore. Is
That's
that
right. It simply blew away in 1886. It was a major port. It rivaled Galveston until 1875. I talk about that that hurricane in the book. That was the end of its major period. And after that, it never did come back completely. But until 1865, it rivaled Galveston because the camels did come in there. The military people who were going out west, clear as far as Fort Bliss at El Paso, came in through there. All of their equipment came in. It was where all of the silver in northern Mexico came into the port that was shipped down to the mint in New Orleans. So all of that is part of the book, and that is accurate history. It was a big deal until the storms just wiped it out. It shouldn't have been there in the first place. It was sitting right down in the water, and it didn't take much to blow it away completely.
But there were two storms, yes?
Yes, 75, and that was the one I wrote about. 75, that was when they were actually having that murder trial, and that actually was a trial that was occurring at that time, and that's why there were so many extra people in town, because it was such a terrible feud that had gone on after the Civil War among the several people up around the area, Cuero and Goliad and that area. And so there'd been a killing the year before of one of the men going to leave and get away from everything, and a couple of them came down and killed him as he and a friend were boarding a ship. They did not kill his wife. She was with them. And so the following year, because the murder was done there, the killing had to be, the trial had to be in Indianola. So people had poured in on the train and wagons, and they filled every hotel and every boarding house because it was so exciting. There were 30 some odd people who'd been killed in that feud. It was called the Taylor-Sutton feud. But all that was accurate that I included in the story.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you calling it in. That was great.
All right, I guess I'm ringing off. Are there other people that are?
I don't
that are
know.
asking questions?
I don't know. There's some other people tuned in, but I can't see the screen well enough to tell how many or what they're doing. They'll have to yell if they want to speak up.
There are some additional questions if you do want to stay on and listen.
Yeah, you can
Oh,
listen.
okay.
That's
Yeah,
all
I'd
right.
like to do that.
Thanks so much.
Several chapters in Steinhaus are from the point of view of different characters. Why did you do that?
Well, and all those characters are the children of Helga, the protagonist. And it seems to me that kids are so much more tuned in to what's going on. They see things that adults overlook or forget about. And I felt like they helped describe the character of Helga and what was actually going on in the lives of everybody. And so that's why I did it that way. And I think it worked fairly well to do that. It was all of her children and their view of what was going on.
So using those different points of view, that's why you chose to do it as a boarding house?
Well, that, and you see, she was a widow when she came into Indianola. Had she not been operating a boarding house and been on the main route into the inland part of Texas, she would have just been off somewhere and wouldn't have known what was going on in the town and in the state. And by doing a boarding house, her patrons brought in all this information that was going on. There was a captain who was an abolitionist. There were people who were constantly coming in. There was a plantation owner who came in, and when they realized that she had black woman who actually sat at the table with them, refused to stay. That, that all made it possible to get her involved in all the political and the social and the cultural things that were going on in that period.
Earlier you mentioned that Indianola was greater or gave Galveston a run for its money as far as a large port on the Texas coast. So why there versus Galveston? Was it because it was doing so well at the time?
Well, first of all, I lived down there for 10 years on that coast, so I got very interested in the old ghost town, because it was a ghost town when I lived there in the 1970s. But I wanted to write about a place that had been so important in Texas history and simply disappeared. And it did rival Galveston because of so much that went in and out of the port. The number of people living in the town may not have ever gotten as large, the population may not have ever been as large as Galveston, but the transport in and out of the port was as big as Galveston until that 75 storm. And then it never came back after that. They ended up making it trying to make it a kind of a luxury resort area, because they had wonderful fishing, fabulous hotels, good restaurants. It's hard to believe that now, isn't it? But it's true. For that era, they were really good. And so they tried their best, and they might have made it, except that 86 storm came, and that was it.
Now, you had mentioned that you were used somebody's book for some of your research. Of course, you lived down there for a long time, so that allowed you a lot of research. What other research
Well, I have an
resources?
awful lot of books on German immigrants coming into Texas. Prince Karl of Solms-Bromwils was the man who brought the first big wave of Germans in, and I have all of those books. I also use the internet. And then because I lectured all these years to groups all over the area, primarily in Austin, always when I would do a seminar, one whole session was on German immigration. And because of that, I got very involved in that history. And so I just learned a lot about it by doing my research to be ready for those lectures. And it wasn't, the people who came in down there were the ones who went up inland and established New Braunfels, and then they established Fredericksburg and Sisterdale and Burney and all kinds of German towns all over Texas. So because of all my research, that was just alive to me, their history.
Knowing so much about the German population that came in, the immigrants, are you going to do a sequel or a different story using those same characters?
I cannot resist. I am doing a prequel, which is kind of weird. I don't know if it'll ever work. I'm over halfway through. Helga Heinrich, who was the protagonist of Steinhaus, had a younger sister named Amelia. And Amelia had come into Texas in 1845 with one of those very early waves of immigrants. And she ended up settling in Indianola. Well, it wasn't called Indianola at the time, but it became Indianola. And she married a Dr. Stein, Joseph Stein. And she was able to convince Helga and her husband Max, the drunk, to come to Texas. And of course he was drunk and fell in the water and drowned before they ever left Germany. But when they arrived, Amelia's husband had already built the boarding house that Helga was to operate, and they had planned that her husband Max would operate his mercantile store. Well, what I'm doing now, as I wrote that, I kept being involved with Amelia, the sister, thinking, why did she do this? Why did she do several things? At the end of the book, she ends up going off to Washington County, where Hempstead is, that area. And I kept thinking about it, and so I'm working now over halfway through a prequel that I am calling The Doctor's Wife. Because when Dr. Stein married her, when she first arrived, she found out he was not the kind of husband she expected. And that's all I'm going to tell you. But anyway, the title is going to be The Doctor's Wife.
Okay. And Myra, do you have German heritage yourself?
No. No, because I lived down there for 10 years. On the weekends, on Sunday afternoons, families, I don't know, sometimes we'd have 10 or 15 families go down to that coast and grill hamburgers because the water was very shallow. The kids could get out and water ski, and they had little bitty sailboats. They practiced sailboating. And I walked the shoreline, and I kept seeing that old, the foundation of the old county courthouse. At that time, in the 70s, that's when I was living there, was right on the edge of the water. And it was shellcrete. That's what they used. It was a kind of concrete. They gathered the shell because it was all shell beach, no sand. And the foundation was made of shellcrete, and it was right there in the edge of the water. So I see that, and I kept thinking about it being the courthouse of the county at that time. And then there was, and still is, an enormous cistern made of shellcrete. It's, I don't know how big, 10 feet maybe across, and 10 or 12 feet deep of shellcrete. And they made the sides then, that are no longer there, of cypress. And that was the only way they had of getting their water, was rainwater in those cisterns. And then there was a cemetery that has now been improved remarkably, but at that time it was just overgrown. And there were numerous headstones that were all the same name, all the same family, that had died in a disease, because they had diseases so often, like yellow fever, and or the 75 storm, that kind of thing. And it just captured my imagination. So it had nothing to do with me being German. I just got involved, and then I interviewed an old woman in 1974 who was 94 years old at the time. Her ancestors had come into Indianola. Is it late? Have I need to go? Her ancestors had come into Indianola years before. And so I interviewed her because I was captured about her life in that area. And she told me all kinds of fabulous stories. She was a wonderful storyteller. But one of the story, as I was leaving her house, she said, there was a woman who came into Indianola with her 4 children after they had watched the father and her husband, who was drunk, leap from the ship to the dock and back again to the ship as the ship was pulling away from the German dock. And as it pulled away, he leaped the last time and missed and fell in the water and drowned. That just captured me. And it stayed with me all these years that I've been writing. I was writing historical markers about German immigration. I wrote about Germans in New Braunfels and Bertie and Sister Dale and Comfort. And that story just stayed with me. So finally I decided I had to write about her, and I named her Helga Heinrich. I made up the name, Helga Heinrich. And that was it. That's what got me started, was that old woman's story. I wish she was still alive so I could tell her she made a difference with me. She had also told me, before she told me that story, she told me about her ancestors riding the Chisholm Trail. And she said that when they settled down, those old cowboys at night, they could see way off on the prairie in the distance, in the dark, firefly flickers of campsites all along the prairie. And when she said that, I could just see those campfires. And then she said they were also afraid when there was a stampede and the cattle would start running, they had to get their horses and run and try to get in front of the cattle to turn them back on themselves. And those cowboys were afraid their horses would step in a prairie dog hole. And if they did, they'd fall in front of that raging cattle. So that was something they were afraid of. Well, that captured me. Then she also went on to say that when she was a young woman, she taught school across the bay from Port Lavaca. And on Monday morning, she sailed her sloop across the bay and taught school all week. And on Friday morning or Friday afternoon, she sailed back across the bay in her sloop and spent the weekend with her family, her parents. So when I wrote my first book, which is Legacy, my first fiction, before that I had written a bunch of nonfiction books. But when I wrote my first fiction, I included those stories in that book. And then it was the story about the woman whose husband had drowned that prompted me to write Steinhaus. It's a long answer, but that's it.
Okay, one last question then. With the new book coming out, how do you plan on marketing and promoting it, considering you're with a small publisher and things of that nature? Because it's very competitive these years.
Oh, it is competitive. And you know what? I'm going to try to get an agent this time. I didn't try before, and try to get a big publisher. And if I don't, I don't know what I'm going to do. But I did go through the Texas Association of Authors, which is your group, and that was one way I publicized it, and it won first place, fiction, last year for 2014. And then I published, it was reviewed by the Kirkus review, and it got a star review, and then they selected it as one of the best of 2014. And so that helped, and I've been watching the sales on Amazon for it on the Publishers Marketplace, and all of the things like that, the getting the 2014 Texas Association of Authors first place, and then the Kirkus reviews and the 2014 Best Fiction, I could see that there was a surge in sales each time. I also, years ago, in the 80s, when my first books came out, nonfiction books, I was at a Writers League meeting and listened to James Michener, who was here in Austin at the time, doing the research on his book, Texas. And I asked him the question, how do you promote your books? And he said, I never turn a group down. Anybody who wants me to talk, I speak. And that's what I recommend. And I have always remembered that. And that was in the 1980s. And so to this day, I speak to groups all the time. I lecture regularly at University of Texas for their continuing education classes, for Lifetime Learning Institute here in Austin, and then a couple of retirement centers. And then anybody who wants me, I go and I talk. And it sells books, because I keep watching. So often they get on Amazon and they buy the ebook because it's the cheapest, but they still will buy the book, and I watch it every day, Monday through Friday. I get a report from Publishers Marketplace to see how it's doing, and I watch it, and it works.
So you recommend not only speaking to groups,
Yes.
but also book contests
Absolutely.
and things like that?
And book clubs. Book clubs love to have people come and talk, and I do that, and answer questions, and just visit. It works. And a lot of times they will buy before I get there, but then after I get there, they'll buy books from me. So it works, and I don't know what else to do, but just keep doing it.
As long as it's working, that's it.
It is. It's working.
Cool. Do you have any last words for anybody?
No, I've had a lot of people say that they want to write a book, that they feel that they have a book in them. And what do I recommend? And what I recommend is sitting down in the chair and putting your fingers on the keyboard and start. And write and write and write, and then rewrite it 1,000,000 times until it sounds right. That's the only way I know to do it. I don't have any other advice.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much for being part of the Texas Book Club. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate you doing this. Bye-bye.